You're listening to the Careers BU podcast, a podcast aimed at Bournemouth University students and graduates. Each episode, we talk to employers, alumni and professionals all about their career journey, what employers are looking for, and help you explore the opportunities that are available to you. Hello and welcome to this episode. I'm your host Amanda, Careers Consultant at Bournemouth University. In this episode, I chat to Brian Heppenstall. Brian is a Careers Manager for the Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management. With over 25 years of working in wildlife conservation and ecology, he has a wealth of knowledge of the sector. In this episode, Brian talks through his own career journey, as well as providing some fantastic advice for building a career in ecology and conservation. Hi Brian, welcome to the podcast.
Hi Amanda, thanks for having me.
Can you just introduce yourself and your role, please?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Brian Heppenstall and I'm currently the Education and Careers Manager for the Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management, which is quite long when you put it all together.
It is, isn't it? So what does that mean? What do you actually do in your role?
So my role was only created around this time last year, actually, and it's in response to a lack of diversity within the sector, really. Conservation and the environment sector as a whole is the second least diverse sector in the UK after agriculture. So my role was created to try and work on a number of fronts to try and reduce that figure. So hopefully during this chat, we'll eke out some of the ways in which we're trying to do that.
Brilliant. Okay. So what has your journey into conservation and ecology looked like? Like, where have you started? What have you been doing? What's jobs along the way?
So, I mean, Bournemouth University is obviously quite a strong part of my experience, really. So I was born in Bournemouth, and apart from holidays and occasionally leaving the borough for work, I've never left. I've always lived in Bournemouth and now slightly over in Poole as well. So my route into the sector really started, as most people within the sector can point to one site that inspired them. And for me, it was Hainsbury Head, which is, a really prominent landmark along the Bournemouth coastline. From there, I undertook subjects at school that I thought I would really enjoy, things like geography, for example, more the outdoor subjects. And then the obvious choice seemed to me to be headed towards a land-based college. So I went to Kingston College, which is just in Dorchester. And I studied there for 3 years doing countryside skills, which taught me a load of outdoor, related skills, like you said, chainsaw, managing livestock, habitat management. And then eventually, then wound up at Bournemouth University doing a degree in environmental protection, which has now split off into a number of different courses. So yeah, that's really kind of the journey into it, as well as obviously the importance of work placements alongside both of those courses as well. So, getting that work experience in whilst at college and university. So that's really the route in.
Yeah, so that's how. And then once you graduated, what sort of jobs were you doing after that?
So it's a funny old sector, really. So I remember graduating, and I often thought that I've got a degree now, so I'll leave, and at the door of the university there'll be like 15 employers waiting for me. Do you want a job in this? Do you want a job in that? But actually, the sector is quite hard to get into because it's quite competitive. So there's a high number of students wanting to do it, and relatively low demand, and that's often around the the amount of investment that goes into the sector. The economy isn't really geared up for supporting conservation in the way that we'd probably quite like. So I guess that's a really long way of saying that my first job after university wasn't actually one that was entirely relevant. So I applied for many jobs that I wanted to do, but ended up doing something I didn't really want to do to fill in the time, which at that point was temping in a mortgage centre. So stuffing
Quite different.
Yeah. So I did that for 9 months. So stuffing envelopes, looking up people's accounts and and changing aspects in there depending on what their status was. But it was useful in some ways. It reassured me that I really did want to work outside, and definitely didn't want to work inside. But it also taught me about working in mixed disciplinary teams as well. Admin, which, there's always going to be a level of admin in any job you go into. So having to be disciplined about it and using systems and designing systems as well. So being able to design databases to handle it. It was all useful stuff. But yeah, 9 months was more than enough.
Yeah. And then what did you do? How did you get out of that and move into an actual job that you're interested in?
So as I said, the sector in many ways is quite hard to get into in terms of the high demand. But in another sense, once a year, there's generally a cycle of seasonal jobs that starts. So that's around the spring. So obviously at the moment, the sun is shining outside, it's beautiful, and a lot of wildlife is emerging. I look out the window, I can see flowers coming out. Bats will be starting to emerge, reptiles will be coming out. So there is typically a number of roles that become available this time of the year around two main areas. One is surveying. So if you want to be an ecologist consultant or a consultant ecologist, those surveying roles that come up with the consultancy, or from a wildlife conservation point of view, it'll be managing people. So the number of visitors that go onto natural sites increase massively at this time of the year, and so there is a need to kind of deal with them and help them in their visits whilst trying to reduce their disturbance. So because I was Dorset based, I then got a job working for the Dorset Heath Partnership. They were called Urban Heath Partnership at the time. But I had to work on 3 local heathlands. And my job basically between March and October was to walk around. It felt at times like I was being a professional killjoy, so to tell people off for what they were doing wrong. There's quite a lot of arson on sites at time as well. So it's very quick responses to fires that have been started, advising people why it's good to pick up after your dog and perhaps why it's good to keep dogs on lead at certain times of the year. But then also running guided walks as well and attending residents' meetings and providing some reassurance. So it's through that seasonal role that I then ended up cracking into the industry fully. And because equally in the winter, some seasonal roles become available managing habitats, which you can't do in the spring, summer. So I was kind of going from one seasonal role in dealing with the public to then a winter seasonal role, habitat managing, and then back to a seasonal role managing the public. And that went on for about 2 years before I first got a full-time permanent job.
Wow. So is that quite typical for those first jobs, is those kind of those seasonal winter role, seasonal spring, summer role?
Yeah, I would say so. The sector is still, it still values its experience, which isn't always a good thing because obviously the gaining of experience can be quite privileged. So the fact that I was in a position where I, perhaps was able to volunteer at times during university allowed me to get some experience. But so did the seasonal roles, because often they don't need a great deal. And if you're looking at those that involve dealing with the public, then things like retail and sales and catering roles can get that experience and demonstrate that experience just as well. But I think that's fairly normal because you get yourself known in these short-term roles as somebody who really cares about what they're doing. The sector likes a great deal of conscientiousness. The pay is not always the best when comparing to other sectors, so I think having that passion for what you're doing is always important. But yeah, I think that's fairly typical. There's lots of different ways to get into the sector, but I think that seasonal role route is often one of the most common.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then what was your first, you said after about a couple of years you went into a full-time role. What did that look like?
So I was working as the Parks and Countryside Officer for Bournemouth Council, as it was then, it's now BCP, for Parks in Boscombe, which is where I was brought up. And obviously Boscombe is an area of Bournemouth that has, sometimes comes with a certain reputation. And some of what you hear about Boscombe is true, but there are many things that you don't hear about Boscombe as well, like how amazing the communities are that are in there and how hardworking they are, and also the size and diversity of their parks and open spaces too. So it was my job really to try and connect local people to the council, to try and help get them into making decisions for their own, for their own local spaces, rather than it being a top-led, this is what's going to happen in your local park or open space. So to provide that link between them, and it was a time it was quite challenging as well. So the parks in Boscombe often get traveller encampments. So I was leading on dealing with encampments that had to be removed at times as well, or encouraged to move, but by legal means. There was a great deal of issues with dog fouling in places, so I had to give out fines for people not picking up after their dogs. We had issues with antisocial behaviour of different varieties as well. And Boscombe Gardens was just finishing an entire renovation off the back of some quite severe antisocial behaviour. So there was a whole community there that were ready to be engaged back into their local open space and ready to be made feel safe again as they were going about using it too. So it really kind of pushed me from a point of view that I was, on these seasonal jobs, doing what I was told often. It was quite instructional. You go here, you speak to these people about this, you drag this tree to this fire and burn it, to somewhere where you had to think quite fast. If you're in a meeting, full of residents who are quite angry about something that's happening, there's often no one else to refer back to. If they're angry at you as a representative of the council. So you have to kind of be in a position to listen. And so that, I spent 5 years doing that and developing different projects within Boscombe Open Spaces. Some of them were to do, some of the projects I was working on were to do with the environment. Some weren't at all. Some were, we ran a series of sports barbecues with the police aiming at bringing down antisocial behaviour in parks, which had a really good effect. But we were out playing, football with local young people to try and get them to understand that there's different ways of using their parks, and the police aren't always there to to just be cruel to them. They're there for a reason. So loads of different and interesting roles that gave me bags of experience.
And I guess that's a real kind of community-based role, and slightly different role to maybe what we would automatically think of as a job in conservation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think those the community roles, the sector has widened out over the last couple of years, and I don't think there's any less jobs in it, but I think the jobs are getting more diverse and more nuanced as well. So community roles as well as engagement roles, sort of educational roles, are those that are increasing. And really, I think that it's not that they're more important than traditional conservation roles, but I think that mostly protected spaces are being managed by teams of professionals, in most instances are in good ecological condition, and they have legal protections to make sure they stay that way. And unless something catastrophic happens, that will remain the case. The question for me and for many others is how we get beyond that to start to repairing more of the environment and start to have a bigger impact. And we can't do that without people, wider society sort of buying into it. So I think those community roles are really, really kind of cool and forward facing. So I think what I was doing back then was perhaps an understanding of what would come really, and how important that communication is with people, and differing your communication styles and who you're talking to as well, and your audience type. It's you learn lessons very quickly.
Interesting. Okay. And then did you stay in that kind of community sector role, or did you move away from that? What kind of next?
So the next role after that, I don't think it wasn't really a move away from community. It just absorbed loads of other different things as well. So then I became the senior ranger of Hainsbury Head, and it was quite early on in my career. So I was only around 30 when I was given that role, and I was given it as part of a restructure of the council. They had to employ people on jobs, who are already employees as they move people around. So I felt both very fortunate, and I guess we'd refer to it as imposter syndrome now. This great feeling of this huge responsibility of a site that has 1 million visitors. It's beloved of the whole county. I'd never managed anybody before at that point. I now had 2 members of staff, one who was slightly older than me, another one who felt they probably were experienced as me as well. So I had to learn quite a lot suddenly as well. But the community were a huge part of it. I don't think they were particularly happy, the community there at that point, with how Hainsbury Head was being managed prior to that, rightly or wrongly. And so it was a real key priority of the team to fix that relationship and get their confidence back. Because what I've discovered in my career is if the community aren't on board, they can slow you down massively. And I mean, that's just from an efficiency point of view. There's obviously loads of good reasons to get a community on board. Any solutions you come up with together are going to be more sustainable because they're going to agree with it and abide by it in the long term as well, because they've had a hand in creating it. You learn more about their behaviours and how that might dictate even the simplest of things, where bins are put, where gates are put. You get information off them. So if you've got antisocial behaviour occurring, what have you seen? Where is it taking place? So all of that all of that kind of stuff that goes into making a healthy relationship was really important. And we really made sure that we fixed that community relationship there. So yeah, I did stay in a community role, but it was more about them managing one fixed site that was heavily protected with lots of rare and endangered species on it.
Okay. And then because I know eventually you moved into more the education. So where did that come in? Did you do jobs before that, or did you go straight into education and lecturing, teaching?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think it was, during lockdown, obviously a lot of people took stock of their lives and decided they might want to be doing a slightly different angle. I've always been very clear that I have to do something I care about. That's not it's not my own role. It's just something I've noticed about me. If I'm not, then I don't think it tends to reflect that well on my performance if I don't care about what I'm doing. So I was always minded that I wanted to stay within conservation and ecology to some extent. But I felt like I'd kind of done the rangering as much as I possibly could, and there was nothing new coming in. We did a project looking at the impacts of time outside on the positive and negative emotions of young people. We were managing the largest breeding stock of Shetlands Shetland cattle outside of the Shetland Isles. We'd undertaken a natterjack toad, a protected species survey that was allowing us to identify them by the warts on their back. We just got funding for a new classroom, a funding for somebody to work with the dog walkers up there to see if we can get more positive behaviours around dogs. And the site was in really good condition. I sort of looked at it and I thought, I don't know what else I've got to offer. And I think I was feeling a bit bored, if I'm honest. That's probably what it comes down to. So I saw the job come up at Kingston Moor, which is where I trained originally. And the teaching at land-based colleges like that is quite unusual compared to other teaching roles, in that you don't have to have a teaching qualification to go for it. You have to have some sort of proof that you can communicate with people, which a ranger role does plenty. We run pond dipping sessions, and we used to run short courses for university students as well. So, I could evidence communication and admin as well. Obviously, my 9 months at the mortgage company did that. But you can also then take a teaching qualification on the side of teaching itself as well. So I did that. I taught while learning how to teach, which is quite odd. I actually got my teaching qualification 2 months before I then moved out of teaching as well. So it took quite a long time to do, and I kind of gone that far really. So yes, I decided to move because I thought I needed a new challenge, and I did.
And did you enjoy that element of it, the teaching?
I did to a degree. Working with students, I've always had this view that the sector's quite unfair and inaccessible, and I wanted to create and have a hand in creating a route that added an alternative, a viable alternative for people. So, we've got university apprenticeships. So I wanted to add vocational education to see if we could, really make a standard that people could follow and people would come to. And I really enjoyed working with students. It was really challenging, especially to start with, because, I was having to deal with students but I had students with neurodiversity, and I'd never dealt with people in that degree before. And so having to learn what makes people tick and learn how to teach people with neurodiversity was really challenging, but it clicked fairly quickly when you made a personal, sort of contact with the student. You understood what made them tick, what motivated them, what they wanted to do. And so that, alongside all of the students I worked with, really was super rewarding. There are elements of teaching, and I think there's every teacher that will probably tell you this, that aren't, and that's the functions that don't often deal with student facing. So there's an awful lot of admin. Sometimes seems slightly unnecessary, but that's just a teacher's perspective, I guess. And there was not a lot of time to get anything done. I was teaching 24 hours a week, and it doesn't leave a lot of time for marking, dealing with parents, because some of my students were under 18 on the side, having to go to open days and run those. So yeah, it was sweet and sour, I guess.
Okay. So, and then obviously now your role is much more about careers education, you said about the bringing in more diversity into the sector. So in terms of your role now, like, how do you do that? In what ways?
So I think this is the role that if it was available when I left Sainsbury, this is the one that I probably would have been looking for, because it takes a strategic look at the sector and starts to think, well, how can we get to where we want it to be? So my role involves a number of different things. One of them is making sure that we have an education system that supports ecology and environmental careers as much as possible. So that might be working on apprenticeship. So we're developing a new level 4 apprenticeship at the moment to give access to ecology, so just to supply a different route. We're looking at re-equipping those people working in the sector now who might have skills gaps that we know about. So how do we go about adding skills to people that have already left and perhaps for some time, left education? How do we retrofit them with things like biodiversity net gain, which, is now a new policy that's come out that requires some skills that, might be lacking. We also look at the diversity, issue within the sector. As I said, second least diverse sector in the UK after agriculture. So how do we go about changing that? And again, it's community. It's all about community. We have to work together and we have to look at the barriers that people have. One of them is education. The second one is experience. So there's a requirement for some entry level roles for experience. Now, there's two sides of that. If we just took that experience as one example, we need to be showing students or people that are career changing where they can get that experience and in the most meaningful way. So, with all due respect, if you were to go to a nature reserve every week and join their general group of volunteers cutting bushes down or litter picking, that's probably not the best experience for somebody who's looking to build their CV into the industry. So we start to talk, about what a quality volunteering experience looks like. And also when you do it as well, universities, I know Bournemouth University has a bursary, or some bursaries exist for students, perhaps going through hardship who need to do a work placement to support them. But then on the flip side of that, we also need to be talking to employers about the impact of them asking for that experience as well. So whilst we can advise people now that they need experience and where to get that, we can also look to where that is a barrier for people and what employers can do to get past that. For example, if they want a demonstration that somebody's able to present to a group, is there a way you can do that interview rather than somebody having a huge CV that requires them to do a lot of experience, a lot of voluntary work? So yeah, it's about looking at the barriers and looking about how we can unpick them to find the best route forward.
To make it more accessible. Okay.
Absolutely.
And one of the things you talked about volunteering there, and what is the best type of the volunteering. So, and that's obviously, we talk a lot to students about like gain some volunteering. So ideally, what types of volunteering would be good for them to get?
It's a great question. I think it depends on where the student is in their journey. If they know, well, let's go back. If they don't know what they want to do, that's always a good one. So if they think there's a job that interests them, there's that trying out before they do it. I had a number of students come to me at Hainsbury Head when we were offering student placements there who were studying ecology but didn't know that ranger roles existed. And by the end, some of them hadn't known it existed and really wanted to do it, and some of them hadn't known it existed and really didn't want to do it at all. And both perspectives are really important. So I think there's that try before you commit kind of thing to each job role. Because if you're going to be doing it for maybe not the rest of your life, because careers don't really work like that anymore, but if you're going to be doing it for a significant amount of time, make sure you like it first. But then secondly, I guess, is for those who want to be a bit more introspective, there's a suggestion that I always have, and I don't know how many students do it. I fear not many. But if you were to look at your CV now, write your CV out, have a properly equipped one. It pays to have it from early on, even if you don't plan to use it for another couple of years, because you can write your history in there and remember things, dates you did courses. But then find a job advert that you really want to do, and then look not just for the job description, but for the person specification, and then look at the difference. So your CV tells you where you are. The person specification of what you want to do tells you what you need to be, and then find the difference between them. And whatever the difference is between them, find some volunteering, or ideally, if you can, paid experience that then bridges that gap. So if you find you're not very good at species identification or understanding for policy work, for example, then you need to be moving or gravitating towards some experience that fills in that gap, because anything else is not necessarily a waste of time, but it's not a meaningful step to where you want to go. But finding out what you need from for your job in the future allows you to make the best steps possible.
Yeah, so being a bit more strategic. So I guess I suppose if you're like a first year at university, then it might be that you're actually just let's get something to build up the network, to identify organisations. I'll just go and do some sort of volunteering in a conservation capacity just to kind of find where those organisations exist. But actually, then it's as you start to realise what it is that you want to do, to really look, like you said, look at those person specs and be a bit more strategic in actually what volunteering is going to add value.
Yeah, absolutely. And you could find that the same level of experience is done with the same organization. It could be that you start working somewhere or start volunteering somewhere. You really like what you're doing, but it starts to get a bit repetitive. But you've seen something else that they do that you found really interesting that you haven't had enough involvement in. I always really respected students that would say, I feel like I've done this enough, but I've seen you do this. Can I have a go at managing this? And handing off, not handing off as in completely unsupervised, but being able to give students more responsibility in those areas that they're particularly interested in. You'd know that they would do a good job, pretty much. You know that they'd come to you for advice, because you wouldn't be allowing them to take ownership of something otherwise. But you'd also have the reassurance that it was making steps in their career as well. And that's a really nice feeling to have as a site manager. And I would always say to ask the employer that you're with, if there's something they do that interests you and you're starting to get bored, or you just really want to go off on that angle, then ask for more involvement in that area. There's there's nothing really more flattering than knowing that a student's been interested in what your or a colleague is doing and then asking specifically to do it. And there's very few cases I could say no. So I would always recommend that if you are speaking to somebody about wanting to do voluntary experience, is ask them what you're going to get out of it, but then ask them what you offer, what you can bring as well. Like you say, a first year student might be, with all due respect, might not be able to bring much, but that's probably not what they're looking for at that stage. They're probably wanting to get more out of it. But as the student goes along, I've been to universities this year and talked to some students, and some of my students at Kingston Moorwood were amazing at things like species ID to do with, insects, for example. Even more to the point where we had a 16-year-old student who knew more about insects than pretty much any professional that I'd ever met. And so he on a site could probably bring a lot. And it can be about that value, well, while I'm here, I'd like to get involved because I can do this for you. And I think that's where it becomes more transactional and both parties get more out of it. But I think just blindly going along every week and getting involved with volunteering that the general public take part in is not always the best use of time for somebody trying to build a career.
So let's talk more about skills then, because I think that kind of leads on to, so what sort of skills are important for students to build to get into conservation or ecology?
So SIEM, who I work for, Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management, we have a competency framework which you can find on our website, and that provides the skills that are needed across the whole sector, which would be unfair for anybody to look on there and saying, I need all of those, because there's too many and you don't need all of those. You need 7 or 8 core skills from there. We know that there are some skills that are lacking in our sector, and I think those are the ones we often guide students towards, because if you're looking to build skills in particular, or even demonstrate them, because I think there are times when students have skills but don't necessarily know how to demonstrate them, then the ones I'll read off are kind of the top ones. And these contain both technical and transferable skills as well. So you've got interpersonal skills, which often a lot of part-time jobs that students hold, the catering industry, retail, can be demonstrated by that. I've had people volunteer for me who have been guide leaders, for example, cub leaders. All of those things provide that interpersonal skills. Good negotiation as well, especially if you're dealing with children. Species identification and practical field skills are two that kind of go together. So species ID is really important, but it takes a long while to build up. It's really quite intimidating for most students to think you have to learn everything. You can't. I don't, and I never will. You can only learn so much, but it's good to find something you're interested in and learn that. It's very hard to learn a lot about something you're not interested in at all. Practical field skills, a first year on, looking for work placement might find that they rock up somewhere for a wildlife trust or local government that gets them involved in practical field skills, how to put fences up, how to manage livestock, how to use a chainsaw, perhaps if they're lucky enough to have something like that. But also just recognizing what those different tools and machinery are used for as well. Somebody might be advising a landowner in the future, and it might not be their job to use a chainsaw or a tractor, but it's handy to know that anyway, just in case you're giving advice. Then another two that fit together, environmental law and policy knowledge. So we're looking to universities to deliver more. I know that the Bournemouth Uni has a particularly good environmental law lecturer. And so understanding that in context and being able to keep up with it as well, that's the really tricky thing. Uni's great at imparting the current advice, but the minute you leave, the responsibility is then on you to keep learning. We have a podcast called Nature in a Nutshell at SCIEM that helps with that. But then also just keeping up to date on LinkedIn is a really good place to look at policy updates and how those are translated into the sector and what we do as well. Then stakeholder engagement and people management, both of those can be demonstrated at uni, particularly if we're doing team projects. But again, in a workplace, they would be particularly evidenced. Project management and report writing would be the other ones. So report writing, often because of the way university degrees are structured, the ecological reports that perhaps students would be writing a lot of the time are not necessarily to the standard that they would be in industry, because the ones in industry aren't graded for a course that teaches quite holistically. So it's always good to have a look. A lot of reports that are submitted now are now public because they go against planning. So it's always good to have a look and see what the sector are doing and to make sure that your standard, even if you're not doing it, that you recognise the difference between what you're being asked to produce perhaps at university level and then after that as well. So those are the skills that the sector is particularly weak on at the moment from graduates from every different course.
Okay, that's a really good list for students to be working on. What about the types of organisations that they could work for in this sector? Because sometimes we just think of one or two types of organisations, but can you kind of give an idea of the types of organisations or charities maybe that they could be identifying to either volunteer or look for jobs in?
Yeah, of course. So it is broad, but it's worth knowing that there's lots of different options out there. So the obvious one for anybody looking, or the obvious ones for anybody looking to go into conservation-based roles would be the wildlife trusts. So there is a wildlife trust for pretty much every county, or if not the region, because they've combined. The National Trust, same difference, they all have their local offices. Then you've got the RSPB, so the RSPB managed sites, and some of those with visitor centres as well. Local authorities, so there's two in Dorset. If we're just looking at Dorset, obviously local authorities are available everywhere, but the two in Dorset are Dorset Council and BCP Council. Both of those have teams that manage nature reserves. Above that, you've then got government agencies. So we have Natural England, the Environment Agency, obviously Nature Scot, which is Natural England's equivalent in Scotland. Natural Resources Wales is the equivalent in Wales. National Parks, obviously, again, slightly different. National Parks all operate slightly differently. So the New Forest, for example, the National Park doesn't own any of the land. So the rangers there are purely to deal with the public, whereas elsewhere in the UK, the rangers may do entirely different roles. There are some where public engagement is diluted a lot with practical works like dry stone walling. You've then got planning departments of local authorities as well. So if you just talked about the ranger teams, but a lot of ecology roles feed into planning. So then you've got planning departments. I know of one Bournemouth University geography graduate that's now a planning officer for BC Council as well. So reviewing those applications that come in that deal with wildlife. Policy and law. So there's another one, you look at firms that might be dealing with that. So that all of the firms I've mentioned will have policy and law officers, that are there to translate the government's whims into the actions of the specific organisation themselves. Then there's a whole other group of organisations. So if we look at ecological consultancy, which is more the commercial arm of the sector, you have all ranges of different sized organisations, from small, medium enterprises up to national and multinational organisations So locally, you have people like Lindsay Carrington, who's based just over in the Purbex, runs a good-sized ecological consultancy, but based mainly around Dorset. And then you go all the way up to people like WSP and RSK, which, are giants with lots and lots of ecological consultants everywhere. Generally, they might want students with a bit more experience, perhaps, but I think every case on its merits, and it's always worth reaching out to them. Ecological consultancy it's quite different work. The focus for both conservation and ecological consultancy is a better functioning natural world with more resilience in the environment. But they both go about it quite differently, and it appeals to different people depending on the size of the job. But both have seasonal roles going in the spring. And so I think if you find that it's a struggle to get into one, you could perhaps look at the other as a meantime kind of role for you to build skills while getting paid. So lots and lots of different organisations to go to. Volunteering wise, definitely, the wildlife trusts. So Dorset Wildlife Trust, if you're looking at Bournemouth and Pond context. The Purbex with the National Trust is a busy site. Hainsbury Head, obviously, in BCP Council. And the RSPB have some really good sites, Arn, and then there's Radipole in Weymouth, which is a really good one for anybody who doesn't drive, because you can jump on the train, and Radipole is in Weymouth in the middle of town, so it's a couple of minutes walk.
That's good. That provides a really nice picture. Obviously, I know there's like smaller charities and organisations as well. You can't possibly provide an endless list of everywhere. So it's up to everyone to do their own research, I guess, and look at what else is around their area that they want to work or volunteer in. But that provides a really great overview, and especially a lot of the larger companies as well, to kind of what organisations to target. So really, really great. So obviously, like you've talked about a lot, it can be competitive to get into this sector. What advice would you give students looking to stand out when they're applying for jobs or placements, maybe?
So, okay, well, the first thing is to check your CV, because I travel around the country a lot, and I see a lot of student CVs. It's slightly a curse of mine. I can't help but offer to look at student CVs, and then I quickly regret it when I get 20 emails. But I've seen some really good CVs this year, but I've also seen a lot of really good students with really terrible CVs. And considering it's just one or two-sided sheet of paper, and it's the first thing. A good CV, as they say, will never get you a job, but it will get you an interview. But equally, if it's not good, it's such as a competitive market that you will not get an interview if you have a bad CV. So Green Jobs for Nature, which is our campaign to help with CV, with career advice in the sector, there is a resource on there for creating CVs that was written with employers. So it's not my opinion, it's the opinion of employers, which is who I thought it'd be best to go to. So if you're in doubt about what a good CV looks like for this sector, check out the Green Jobs for Nature resource page for that. The second one would be a LinkedIn account, and being able to use a LinkedIn account properly as well. I mean, I'm going to plug again Green Jobs for Nature. We've just released a LinkedIn resource on there. And again, that's all come from both research into what makes a good LinkedIn account and employer perspective as well. And I think students are often encouraged to have a LinkedIn account, but often don't know how to keep it up to date. Because I think there's a fear that people working in the industry have obvious things to post about. But what can I post about as a student? Well, you can post about loads of stuff. All the stuff that comes out. Government are constantly changing the boundaries on planning at the moment. So you could post your perspectives on there. You could post a good book that you've been reading about wildlife. You can post a guest speaker that's come to speak at uni and then link them in it. Guest speakers love that. Gets you remembered. Results of assessments that you've had. And it's not like other social media. It doesn't matter if you don't get a single like on a post. What really matters is that in 6 months' time you apply for a job, you can put a QR code of your LinkedIn profile on your CV, and then the recruiter looks at it, which you'll see. And the lack of likes don't matter, but it could get you an interview, which could lead to a job. So a healthy LinkedIn would be the other one. But I think also then just considering like how you demonstrate your passion at interview would be another one. So things like body language, dealing with any nerves by telling people interview you're nervous because the job means a lot to you, that kind of thing. But then answering questions, in a really sensible and structured way, so you're making the most of your narration of your experiences. So you can say simply, my experience of of working in a team comes from a project at university. And that could be your entire answer to a really important question. But turning it into a narrative about what you were doing at uni, what problems you had as part of a team, trying to get a direction, trying to get agreement, trying to get a project that made all of your conjoined efforts worthwhile and made into something salient at the end. What story went into it? And it's about filling that time up. Because I think ultimately they're the three things that really matter, right? So LinkedIn gets you noticed. A good CV translates that LinkedIn, experience into a recruiter for a good way, and then that interview experience. And we know from studies that by that point, your CV has impressed them. You're kind of on equal footing with everybody else. It's who impresses them. Weirdly, a study from the United States said it's whoever excites the interviewer the most will get the job, and they'll go off gut feeling for excitement more than anything else. And generally, it's that, you don't have to come in juggling fire. That's not the excitement they're looking for. What they're looking for is like excitement for working with you. And sometimes that can even be about bringing in a skill that they didn't expect. When I was recruiting assistant rangers, if somebody, for example, came in with a really lively Instagram account, I might not have considered that part of the job description, but that might have been what lifted them out. If I think, well, you're going to be great at managing our social media as well as doing all the things that we've employed you to do. So think about those other things that you can do and you bring to the table as well as what they're asking for.
Brilliant. I think that's given some really great advice. So obviously we've talked about volunteering, and once you do some of that volunteering, then that's everything you can add, or work experience. And like you said, it could be relevant, well, hopefully relevant work experience, but some of those other skills, and then like even customer service, retail, but that all adds to those CVs, the LinkedIn, that gives you stuff to write about and an interview. So it's things that they can be working from day one at university.
Yeah, exactly. And the interview skills, we've also got a resource on the Green Jobs for Nature website about interview skills as well. So it's all on there. We've tried to do the hard work for people to find out how to best perform all of those stages.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. I think you've given some really great advice to our students and grads looking to break into the conservation and ecology sector. So yeah, thank you so much for all that advice and information. And I'll put the show notes, I'll put the links to Green Jobs for Nature as well, so students can access that. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening today. Please remember to subscribe and follow so you can keep up to date with all new episodes.